The chamber of the Galactic Council was vast, a domed cathedral of polished obsidian and shimmering light, its ceilings swirling with holographic representations of countless star systems. Delegates from 100 worlds sat in their floating thrones, their various forms flickering under the ambient glow of the chamber's central podium. The weight of millennia pressed down upon this place, where empires had risen and fallen, where wars had been declared and averted. And today, a warning was being issued. High Chancellor Orvash of the Korthian Dominion, his carapace gleaming under the Council's artificial starlight, clicked his mandibles together before speaking. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the authority of countless cycles of rule. "We have gathered here today to discuss the matter of humanity." A murmur spread through the chamber. Some voices were laced with curiosity, others with amusement, but most with skepticism. At the far end of the gathering, Grand Strategist Zalvun of the Vorthan Dominion leaned forward in his seat, his crimson eyes glinting with contempt. "Humans," Zalvun scoffed, his thick, armored hands gripping the armrests of his throne. "Is this truly worth our time? They are a young species, barely a blip in the galactic timeline. Whatever concerns you have, High Chancellor, I assure you, they are exaggerated." Orvash studied him for a moment before exhaling, his mandibles parting slightly in what passed for exasperation among his kind. "You are not the first to say this, and you will not be the last to regret it." The murmur in the chamber quieted. Orvash gestured, and a hollow projection flared to life in the center of the chamber. It displayed a sequence of images, starships burning in the void, soldiers in advanced power armor emerging from the rubble of devastated cities, entire fleets lost to the dark. The images were from different wars, different conflicts. And yet, they all shared one common denominator: humans. "They were primitive once," Orvash continued, his tone measured, his gaze sweeping over the gathered leaders. "We watched them struggle on their homeworld, divided by their own petty conflicts. We thought they would die in the ashes of their own wars, that they would never reach the stars." He paused. "We were wrong." The projection changed, now showing footage from an ancient battle, the first time the Council had ever truly encountered humanity in war. It had been against the Ivran Ascendancy, an empire that had seen Earth as ripe for conquest. The Ivran had boasted superior technology, superior numbers. The war should have been a brief one. Instead, it lasted 20 standard years. "The Ivran believed they would break humanity," Orvash said, voice growing heavier. "They sent their fleets to bombard human worlds. The humans survived. They sent their armies to crush human resistance. The humans adapted. They set fire to entire planets, razed cities to the ground, but still, the humans endured. And when the humans struck back, they did not fight as the Ivran expected. They did not follow the rules of war as we know them." Zalvun let out a low growl of impatience. "Survivors. Resilient. And yet, where is this Ivran ascendancy today?" Orvash turned his gaze toward him. "Gone." The word was simple, yet it struck like a blade. The chamber fell into silence. The Ivran ascendancy had existed for over 4,000 cycles. It ruled over 30 systems. It had a fleet that could rival any of our own. Orvash leaned forward, mandibles clicking. "And now, they are extinct." Zalvun scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease behind his eyes. "You speak as if these humans are some kind of mythical force. A mere species cannot do what you suggest." Orvash's expression did not change. "They did not just defeat the Ivran, Grand Strategist. They erased them." A shiver ran through the gathered council. The Vorthan commander straightened in his seat, crossing his thick arms. "You expect me to believe that these creatures, these humans, are a threat to the Dominion?" Orvash exhaled slowly. "I expect you to listen." The hollow display shifted again, now showing more recent encounters. Worlds once ruled by proud empires, now under human control. Battles that had started as conquests but ended in retreat. The pattern was always the same. Those who underestimated humanity learned, too late, that humans did not fight for conquest. They fought for survival. "They will not fight as you expect," Orvash said. "They will not break as you hope. They will learn, they will adapt, and when they strike back, they will not stop until you are dust." Zalvun's lip curled in amusement. And yet, despite all your fear-mongering, the humans remain a minor power. The Dominion's fleets could burn their worlds before they even saw us coming. The High Chancellor's gaze darkened. And what if they survive? What if they fight back? What if they win? Zalvun laughed. They won't. Orvash said nothing for a long moment. He simply watched the grand strategist, as if observing a man who had already sealed his fate. Neither did the Ivran, he murmured. The chamber doors hissed open as Zalvun rose to his feet. The Vorthan Dominion will not be frightened by the ghost stories of old men, he declared, his voice carrying across the gathered leaders. Let the humans resist. Let them fight. It will change nothing. Orvash did not stop him as he turned and strode toward the exit, his entourage following behind him. He only watched, mandibles clicking in a slow, measured rhythm. Then, softly, he spoke once more. They never listen. The words hung in the air long after the doors sealed shut. The Vorthan fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, an armada of warships stretching across the void like a predator's snarl. Rows of sleek, obsidian-black hulls bristled with weaponry, each vessel a masterpiece of destruction. Their arrival in the Soul Border territories was not subtle, nor was it meant to be. It was a declaration, a hammer's descent before the anvil had even been set. Aboard the bridge of the Dominion's flagship, Vengeance of Zal, Grand Strategist Zalvun stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his crimson eyes fixed on the small blue planet in the distance. Earth. The cradle of the species the Galactic Council had so absurdly warned against. The weight of inevitability settled over him. This was not a battle. It was an extermination. Planetary defenses, he asked, his voice a deep growl of command. Minimal, strategist, one of his officers responded, his scaled fingers dancing over a console. Orbital platforms, outdated. Fleet presence, insignificant. They will not be able to withstand a full assault. Zalvun allowed himself a slow, satisfied exhale. The humans had been left alone for too long, given too much time to fester. He had studied them in the days since the council meeting, parsing through every available record. Resilient, perhaps. Adaptable, to an extent. But they were not special. They bled. They burned. And when their cities crumbled beneath orbital bombardment, they would kneel, as all lesser species had before the Dominion. A notification pulsed across the bridge's main display. A transmission. The humans were responding. Open the channel, he commanded, amused by their audacity. The screen flickered, revealing the image of a human officer. She stood rigid, her dark uniform crisp, the insignia on her chest unfamiliar but irrelevant. Her face betrayed nothing, no fear, no desperation, just a steady gaze that met his own. This is Admiral Victoria Hayes of the United Terran Defense Force. Her voice was controlled, unwavering. State your intentions. Zalvun's mandibles curled into something close to amusement. He gestured to the expanse of his fleet behind him. Do you truly need to ask? A pause. You have violated Terran space. Withdraw your fleet immediately. The bridge erupted in low, rumbling laughter from the assembled officers. Zalvun did not join them. Instead, he leaned forward, letting his presence fill the screen. You do not give orders here, human. Hayes did not blink. Neither do you. The laughter stopped. Zalvun narrowed his eyes, studying her. There was no bravado in her voice, no empty posturing. Just fact. A minor irritation, nothing more. You are outmatched, he said, keeping his tone patient. Surrender now, and we will make this painless. Admiral Hayes tilted her head slightly, as if considering. Then, without looking away, she reached off-screen and pressed something on her console. The transmission cut. Zalvun frowned. Insolence. A futile display. He turned to his weapons officer. Begin the bombard. The ship lurched violently. The deck shuddered beneath his feet, alarms shrieking through the bridge. What was that? He barked, his mind snapping to full alert. The officer's scales paled as he scanned the readings. We've taken damage. Impossible. Zalvun strode toward the display, eyes darting across the chaos of his fleet. From where? There was no... Another impact. This time, the lights flickered, and the ship's stabilizers groaned in protest. The fleet's perfect formation was breaking. Several ships had already begun to list, their shields struggling against nothing. No visible enemy. No incoming signatures. Then, a sudden pulse of energy flared across the void. A single point of disruption, almost imperceptible. A moment later, another ship exploded, its hull splitting apart as unseen weapons carved through its armor. Stealth ships. Human ships. Zalvun's blood ran cold. He spun to his officers. Find them. Now. The fleet's sensors flared to life, scanning desperately for the source of the attack, but the humans had already vanished into the black. No signals, no traces, just silence. And then, another ship erupted into flame. The humans had not sent a fleet to meet them in battle. They had not deployed their forces in open combat. They had chosen the darkness instead. A realization clawed at the edges of Zalvun's mind. This was not a mistake. This was not desperation. This was the plan. The attack pattern was methodical, precise. Human forces were targeting command ships, supply vessels, anything that would cripple the Dominion's ability to retaliate. They were not fighting for survival. They were hunting. Zalvun clenched his fists. This was not war. This was an ambush. A low, garbled transmission cut through the chaos, crackling with static. One of his officers, barely alive, voice shaking. "They see us," the voice whispered. "We don't see them." Then, silence. Zalvun's fury surged. He would not allow this insult to stand. "All ships, converge on my signal. Flush them out." The fleet responded, tightening their formation, illuminating the darkness with wide-range pulse scans. But it was too late. The moment they clustered together, the human forces struck again, this time from within their own ranks. Zalvun's own vessel groaned as someone breached its hull. Internal alarms screamed. Security teams scrambled, but the enemy had already made their way inside. The Vorthons had come here to conquer. The humans had come to kill. Zalvun felt something he had not felt in decades, something foreign and unwelcome creeping into the edges of his mind. Doubt. Then, a single transmission flickered onto the screen. Admiral Hayes. She leaned forward, her expression unchanged, her voice as calm as before. "You were warned." The transmission ended, and the war began. The corridors of vengeance of Zal were bathed in flickering red light, the emergency systems struggling to keep up with the chaos unfolding within. The scent of burning circuitry and charred flesh hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of ozone from ruptured plasma conduits. Zalvun moved with controlled urgency, his heavy footfalls echoing down the steel-lined hallways as his honor guard flanked him. His ship was under siege. Not by an enemy fleet, not by a planetary defense force, but by ghosts. The humans had not stormed his vessel in waves. They had come like phantoms, slipping through breaches in the hull with an efficiency that made his blood run cold. His warriors had engaged them, but the battle had not been one of clashing ranks or grand formations. No, the humans had made it personal. Close quarters. Ruthless. The corridors had become killing fields, where shadows moved with lethal intent and every turn could be the last. His forces were dying. Zalvun clenched his jaw, his mandibles twitching in fury. He would not allow this. The Dominion did not fall to lesser creatures, and certainly not to some backwater predators that had barely clawed their way into space. As he turned the corner into the ship's command nexus, a dying warrior slumped against the bulkhead caught his eye. The Vorthon's chest had been pierced in 3 places, the edges of the wounds seared black. A human weapon. But it was not just the manner of death that unsettled Zalvun, it was the expression frozen on his soldier's face. Fuck. Not rage. Not determination. Just pure, uncomprehending disbelief. Zalvun forced himself to look away, stepping into the command center. The room was a battlefield of its own, operators frantically calling out damage reports, officers struggling to maintain order, the tactical display a mess of red indicators marking every point of conflict across the ship. "Status," he growled, striding toward the center console. A junior officer turned, his scaled face drenched in sweat. "We've lost control of decks 7 through 10. Engineering is compromised. Security teams report heavy losses." He hesitated before adding, "The humans are inside the reactor core." Zalvun's claws dug into the steel railing. "How?" They move differently than any force we've encountered," the officer stammered. "They don't hold ground. They strike, then vanish. We cannot predict their movements." Zalvun exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had underestimated them. Even after Orvash's dire warnings, even after the initial ambush, he had believed, assumed, that humans fought the way lesser species did, that they had limits. But he was beginning to see the truth. They did not fight wars. They ended them. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber. The officer beside him jerked back, a neat hole drilled between his eyes. For a fraction of a second, Zalvun saw nothing. No muzzle flash, no heat signature. Just death, sudden and precise. Sniper. Inside his own command center. His warriors reacted instantly, raising weapons, scanning the shadows for the unseen attacker. Another shot rang out. Another soldier crumpled. The humans weren't just here to sabotage his ship. They were here for him. Zalvun snarled, his mind racing. His elite guard formed a protective circle around him, scanning every vantage point. But the human remained unseen. A perfect predator. His claws flexed. He would not cower. He would not run. A voice crackled to life over the ship's intercom, cutting through the alarms and shouting officers. "Come, cold. Grand strategist." It was Admiral Hayes. Zalvun's eyes snapped toward the main display as her image flickered into existence. Unlike before, she was no longer standing on the bridge of her own vessel. The background was dimly lit, metallic. She was on his ship. His muscles tensed. "You dare." "I warned you," she interrupted, her voice devoid of malice, devoid of arrogance. "Just fact. I told you to leave. You didn't listen." Zalvun's mind burned with fury. "You think you have won?" For the first time, she allowed a small smile. It wasn't one of joy or victory. It was something colder. A soldier's acknowledgement of inevitability. "I think it's already over." A deep, resonating tremor shook the ship. Not a simple impact, not a glancing blow from an external attack. Something deeper, more final. The reactor. Zalvun's breath caught. A cold realization settled over him, heavier than any weight he had carried before. The humans had not come here to fight him ship to ship. They had infiltrated his very core, and now they had taken control of his beating heart. Hayes tilted her head slightly. "You feel it, don't you?" He did. The ship was dying. He had not been outgunned. He had not been outmaneuvered. He had been outthought. Another tremor. The main lights flickered, replaced by the pulsing crimson glow of emergency power. A final warning before the inevitable collapse. Hayes' voice softened, almost pitying. "The Dominion believes power is measured in the size of its fleet. You think victory comes from crushing your enemies beneath overwhelming might." She leaned forward slightly, her next words cutting through the noise of his failing empire. "Humans don't fight to conquer, Zalvun." The grand strategist clenched his fists, his breath ragged, his vision darkening at the edges. "They fight to survive." The transmission cut, and then the world exploded into fire. The wreckage of vengeance of Zal hung in the void, a smoldering graveyard of twisted metal and drifting corpses. Fires flickered along its shattered hull, remnants of an empire's arrogance laid bare. The once mighty flagship of the Dominion, a vessel meant to bring Earth to its knees, was now little more than a silent monument to a war already lost. Aboard the UTDF Revenant, Admiral Victoria Hayes stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the destruction through the reinforced viewport. The bridge was silent, save for the steady hum of systems running at optimal efficiency. Around her, officers monitored screens with quiet precision, their movements practiced and calm. There was no celebration, no cheers of victory, just the measured acceptance of another battle won. She exhaled slowly. The mission had been brutal. Surgical. Entire squads had been lost securing vengeance of Zal's reactor, ensuring there would be no retreat, no recovery. It had been necessary. The Dominion did not surrender, and any survivors left aboard that ship would have only regrouped, rearmed, and returned for vengeance. This was the only way to make sure they didn't. The only way to make sure Earth saw another sunrise. A transmission request pulsed on her console. She tapped the control, and the weathered face of Director Orvash from the Galactic Council flickered into view. His amber eyes, usually calm and unreadable, now held something she had never seen before. Resignation. So, he murmured, voice barely above a whisper, it has come to this. Hayes tilted her head. You knew it would. Orvash sighed, rubbing his temples. I warned them. I told the Council the Dominion was overextending, that they did not understand what they were provoking. His gaze lifted to meet hers, filled with something bordering on regret. But even I did not fully grasp what humans were capable of. Hayes studied him for a long moment. Do you now? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, glancing at something off-screen. When he looked back, the weight of history seemed to press against his shoulders. The Dominion will not recover from this. Their fleet was their power, and their power was their identity. Without it, they will fracture. The Council will intervene, salvage what it can, reshape the galactic order. He hesitated. And you? Hayes understood the unspoken question. What will humanity do now? She had no illusions about the implications of this victory. The destruction of Vengeance of Zal had not just secured Earth's safety, it had changed the balance of the galaxy. The Dominion, a force that had ruled with fear for centuries, had not just been defeated. It had been humbled. And the ones who had done it were not an empire, not a coalition of superior worlds, but a single, stubborn species from the edge of known space. A species that had been warned against. A species that had been underestimated. She allowed a small, humorless smile. That depends on the rest of you. Orvash's gaze narrowed slightly. The Council will not move against humanity. Not after this. But there will be consequences. There were always consequences. She knew that. Humanity had not sought this war, but it had fought it with a determination the galaxy had never seen before. And now, every species watching from the shadows, every power once content to ignore them, would be forced to reconsider what it meant to provoke the people of Earth. Hayes leaned forward slightly, voice steady. We didn't ask for this. We didn't want to fight a war. But we did, and we won. If the galaxy wants peace, they'll have it. Her eyes darkened. But if they come for us again, they'll find out exactly why the Dominion fell. Orvash regarded her in silence, then gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The transmission ended. Hayes exhaled, then turned back to the viewport. The debris field stretched far beyond sight, the remnants of a species that had believed war was about overwhelming force, about crushing opposition with sheer might. They had never understood the truth. War wasn't about who had the most ships. It was about who was willing to do what needed to be done. And humanity? Humanity had been doing that for a very, very long time.